The snow came down in blinding sheets across the Wyoming plains, and Katherine Pierce knew that if she stopped moving, she would die out here. But dying in the white drifts seemed a better fate than another night under her husband's fists. Her thin coat provided little protection against the February wind that howled across the open country, and her boots, worn through at the soles, left bloody prints in the snow behind her. She had fled the small ranch house 15 miles back when Marcus had passed out drunk after beating her so badly she could barely see through her swollen left eye. The year was 1882, and women had few options when it came to brutal husbands, but Katherine had finally reached her breaking point. She would rather freeze to death free than spend another moment in that prison of violence and terror. The landscape stretched endlessly white in every direction, and Katherine had lost all sense of direction hours ago. Her fingers had gone numb inside her thin gloves, and her face felt like it was being sliced by 1,000 tiny knives. She stumbled forward through drifts that sometimes reached her waist, driven by nothing but the animal instinct to survive, and the desperate hope that somewhere ahead there might be shelter. When she finally collapsed, it was not from choice but because her legs simply refused to carry her any further. She fell face first into a snowbank, and for a moment she considered just staying there, letting the cold take her gently into whatever came next. At least it would be peaceful. At least Marcus could never hurt her again. The sound of horse hooves crunching through snow barely registered in her fading consciousness. She felt strong hands turning her over, lifting her, and then she was being carried. A deep voice spoke words she could not quite make out, and then there was warmth against her face, the smell of leather and wool and something distinctly masculine that was nothing like the sour whiskey stench of her husband. Katherine woke in stages. First came the warmth, seeping into her frozen limbs with painful prickles that made her gasp. Then came awareness of being wrapped in thick blankets, lying on something soft. Finally, her eyes fluttered open to see rough wooden walls, a stone fireplace with flames crackling cheerfully, and a tall figure standing with his back to her, stirring something in a pot hung over the fire. "You are awake," the man said without turning around. His voice was deep and calm, with the slight drawl of someone who had spent his life in the West. "Thought I might lose you there for a while. Your lips were blue when I found you." Katherine tried to sit up, but her body protested every movement. The man turned then, and she got her first good look at him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that fell almost to his collar and eyes the color of whiskey in firelight. His face was tanned and weathered, with the kind of rugged handsomeness that came from living hard under open skies. He moved with the easy grace of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. "Where am I?" Katherine managed to croak out. Her throat felt raw and speaking hurt. "My cabin," he said, ladling something hot into a tin cup and bringing it over to her. "About 3 miles north of Medicine Bow. Drink this. It is just broth, but it will help." She took the cup with shaking hands and he steadied it for her, guiding it to her lips. The hot liquid burned all the way down, but it was the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. She drank greedily, and he refilled the cup twice more before setting it aside. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving me." He nodded, settling into a chair near the fire. "I was checking my trap lines when I spotted your tracks. Followed them until I found you. You came a long way through that storm. Must have been something pretty bad to send you out into a blizzard like that with no proper gear." Katherine looked down at her hands, wrapped now in clean bandages. She could feel similar bandaging on her feet. "I had to leave." "I am not asking you to explain," he said gently. "A person's business is their own. Name is Ethan Jameson, by the way. Most folks just call me Ethan." "Katherine," she said softly. "Katherine Pierce." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the wind howling outside. Katherine studied him covertly. He had the build of a man who worked hard for his living, with strong hands that looked capable of gentleness, despite their obvious strength. There was a quietness about him, a sense of someone comfortable with solitude but not hardened by it. "How bad is the storm?" she finally asked. Ethan glanced toward the window, where snow pressed against the glass. "Bad. Worst I have seen in 3 years. It will be days before anyone can travel. The drifts are already higher than a horse's head in places." Katherine felt a flutter of fear in her chest. "My husband, he will be looking for me." Ethan's expression hardened slightly. "Is he the reason you were out there?" She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. Shame burned in her chest, though she knew logically that she had nothing to be ashamed of. Marcus was the monster, not her. "He will never find you here," Ethan said firmly. The conviction in his voice made her look up. He met her gaze steadily. "This cabin is not on any map, and in this storm, a man could pass within 10 feet of it and never see it. You are safe here, Katherine. I give you my word on that." Something in the way he said her name made her chest tighten. It was said with respect, with kindness, so different from the way Marcus spat it like a curse. She felt tears prick at her eyes and turned her face away, not wanting this stranger to see her cry. "You should rest more," Ethan said, standing up. "Your body has been through an ordeal. I will wake you in a few hours for more broth and to change those bandages." Katherine wanted to protest, to say she had already been too much trouble, but exhaustion pulled at her like a riptide. She let her eyes drift closed, and this time, for the first time in years, she slept without fear. The next time she woke, it was dark outside and the cabin was lit only by the warm glow of the fireplace. Ethan sat in his chair, oiling a saddle with long, practiced strokes. He looked up when he heard her stir. "How are you feeling?" he asked, setting aside his work. "Better," Katherine said, and was surprised to find it was true. Her body still ached and her feet and hands throbbed, but the bone-deep cold was gone. "How long did I sleep?" "About 6 hours. The storm is still going strong." He moved to the fire and ladled more broth into a cup. "Can you sit up on your own?" Katherine pushed herself upright, trying not to wince at the pain. Ethan noticed anyway and frowned slightly, but he said nothing as he handed her the cup. This time, her hands were steady enough to hold it herself. "I should check your feet," Ethan said after she had finished drinking. "Frostbite can turn bad quickly." Katherine felt her face heat with embarrassment, but she nodded. Ethan knelt at the end of the bed, his movements respectful and professional as he carefully unwrapped the bandages. His hands were gentle as he examined her feet, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You are lucky," he said finally. "Your toes are frostbitten, but not badly. You will likely lose a bit of skin, but I think you will keep everything attached. Your fingers, too. It will hurt like hell for a while, though." "I do not care about pain," Katherine said quietly. "I am used to it." Ethan's hands stilled and he looked up at her, his eyes dark with an emotion she could not quite read. "You should not have to be," he said, his voice rough. "No one should have to be used to pain." He rewrapped her feet with clean bandages, then did the same with her hands. When he was finished, he settled back into his chair, and Katherine found herself reluctant to lie back down. The silence between them felt comfortable rather than awkward. "Have you lived here long?" she asked, wanting to hear his voice, wanting to learn about this man who had saved her life. 3 years, Ethan said. "Built this cabin myself when I decided I had had enough of drifting. I do some trapping, some hunting, occasional work at the ranches around Medicine Bow when they need extra hands. It is a simple life, but it is mine. It sounds peaceful. It is." He paused, then added, lonely sometimes but peaceful. Katherine understood that kind of loneliness. She had been married to Marcus for 2 years, and every day of it had been lonely in a way that cut deeper than any physical isolation could. To be with someone and still feel utterly alone was worse than being by yourself. "Why did you stop drifting?" she asked. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I got tired of running," he said finally. "Spent 5 years after the war just moving from place to place, never settling, never letting anyone get close. One day I woke up and realized I was not living, just existing. Figured it was time to put down roots, see what happened." "The war," Katherine repeated softly. "You fought, last 2 years of it. Joined up when I was 17, lied about my age, saw more death than any person should see." He shook his head. "But that was a long time ago. I try not to think about it much anymore." Katherine did the math in her head. If he had been 17 at the end of the war in 1865, that made him about 26 now, only 3 years older than her own 23 years. Yet he seemed older somehow, carved by experiences she could only imagine. "I joined Marcus's ranch as a cook when I was 19, Katherine found herself saying. Words she had never spoken aloud to anyone began tumbling out. "He courted me proper, was a perfect gentleman. My parents had died the year before from cholera, and I had no other family. He seemed like an answer to prayer, a way to not be alone anymore. We married after 3 months of courtship." She stopped, her throat tightening. Ethan waited patiently, not pushing, just listening. "He did not show his true nature until after the wedding," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "The first time he hit me was 2 weeks after we married. I burned the supper and he backhanded me across the face. I was so shocked I just stood there. He apologized after, cried, said it would never happen again. But it did. It kept happening. And it got worse." "How did you finally get away?" Ethan asked gently. "Last night he came home drunk and mean. He beat me worse than he ever had before, and I knew if I stayed, eventually he would kill me. When he passed out, I just started walking. I did not even think about where I was going or what I would do. I just knew I had to get away." Ethan's jaw was tight, his hands clenched on the arms of his chair. "He will answer for what he has done," he said, his voice low and hard. "No," Katherine said quickly. "Please. I do not want more violence. I just want to be free of him. I just want to live without fear." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. But you need to know that you are not going back to him. I do not care what the law says about a man and his wife. You are never going back there." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Katherine's heart skip. She barely knew this man, yet he was offering her something no one else ever had. Safety without conditions, protection without payment. It was overwhelming and terrifying and wonderful all at once. The storm raged for 3 more days. During that time, Katherine and Ethan settled into an easy rhythm. He taught her how to make proper coffee over the fire, and she showed him a trick for making biscuits that stayed soft even when cooked in a Dutch oven. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their lives, their dreams, their fears. Katherine learned that Ethan had been orphaned at 15 when fever took both his parents within a week of each other. He had worked on ranches across Texas and New Mexico before drifting north to Wyoming. He loved the mountains, loved the wild spaces where a man could ride for days and never see another soul. But he also confessed that he had been lonelier than he realized before she arrived, that he had forgotten what it was like to have someone to talk to share meals with, to simply exist alongside. Ethan learned that Katherine had once dreamed of becoming a teacher, that she loved reading and could recite long passages of poetry from memory. She told him about her childhood in a small town in Missouri, about her parents who had loved each other fiercely and taught her what real love should look like. That knowledge, she said, was what had finally given her the courage to leave Marcus. She knew what she had with him was not love, was not even close to love. On the fourth morning, Katherine woke to silence. The wind had finally stopped howling. She sat up carefully, her feet still tender but healing, and found Ethan already awake, standing at the window. "Storm has passed," he said without turning around. "Snow is piled high, but the sky is clear." Katherine felt a knot of anxiety form in her stomach. A clear sky meant Marcus could search for her. A clear sky meant her brief sanctuary might be coming to an end. "What do I do now?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. Ethan turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "That depends," he said slowly. "You can stay here if you want. I know we have only known each other a few days, but I would like you to stay, Katherine. I can keep you safe. I can make sure he never touches you again." "Why would you do this for me?" Katherine whispered. "You do not know me. I could bring nothing but trouble to your door." Ethan crossed the room and knelt beside the bed, taking her bandaged hands gently in his. "Because in 4 days, you have become more important to me than I thought another person could be. Because when I look at you, I see someone brave and strong and beautiful, inside and out. Because the thought of you going back out into that cold, alone and afraid, makes me feel like someone is squeezing my heart in a vise." Katherine felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I am still married to him," she said. "In the eyes of the law and the church, I am his wife." "Then we will figure out how to change that," Ethan said firmly. "There are lawyers in Cheyenne who handle divorces, especially in cases like yours. It will not be easy and it will not be quick, but it can be done. In the meantime, you can stay here. I will sleep in the barn if it makes you more comfortable. I will not touch you, will not pressure you for anything. I just want to know you are safe." Katherine looked into his eyes and saw only sincerity, only genuine care and concern. This man who owed her nothing was offering her everything. It was more than she had dared to hope for. "I want to stay," she said softly. "If you truly mean it, I want to stay." The smile that broke across Ethan's face was like sunrise after a long night. "I mean it," he said. "I have never meant anything more in my life." The next weeks passed in a strange sort of domestic bliss. True to his word, Ethan moved his sleeping roll to the barn, insisting that Katherine needed the warmth and comfort of the cabin while she healed. During the days, he checked his trap lines and hunted, bringing back meat that Katherine learned to cure and preserve. She cleaned the cabin, mended his clothes, and slowly transformed the sparse bachelor dwelling into something that felt like a home. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked, or sometimes Ethan would read aloud from one of the few books he owned while Katherine worked on knitting a new pair of socks for him. The domesticity of it all felt surreal to Katherine. This was what marriage should have been like. This easy companionship, this mutual respect and care, this feeling of safety and peace. But the shadow of Marcus hung over everything. Katherine knew he would not just accept her disappearance. He was a man who viewed his wife as property, and he would not take kindly to his property running away. Every time she heard a horse approaching, her heart would race with fear. But Ethan had been right. The cabin was isolated enough that visitors were rare, and so far, no one had come looking. A month after the blizzard, Ethan rode into Medicine Bow to purchase supplies and to quietly inquire about Katherine's husband. He returned with news that made Katherine's blood run cold. "Marcus Pierce has been making a lot of noise in town," Ethan said, his expression grim. "Telling everyone his wife ran off during the blizzard and probably died in the storm. He has been playing the grieving husband, but from what I heard, most folks are not buying it. Seems people knew what he was like." even if they did not speak up before. Is he still looking for me? Katherine asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay calm. He is, but he is searching in the wrong areas, heading south toward Laramie. He thinks you might have tried to make it to the railroad. Ethan hesitated, then added, I also spoke to a lawyer while I was in town. Fellow named Harrison Gates. He handles divorce cases and says he has won several for women in situations like yours. I told him I had a friend who might need his services. He said to bring her in whenever she is ready. Katherine felt a flutter of hope in her chest. Really, he could help me. He seemed confident. Said Wyoming law is a bit more progressive than some other territories when it comes to women's rights. With your testimony about the abuse, and maybe some witnesses who saw the results of his violence, he thinks you have a strong case. Over the next few days, Katherine wrestled with the decision. Filing for divorce meant coming out of hiding, meant facing Marcus in court, meant reliving all the horrors of their marriage in front of strangers. But it also meant freedom. Real, legal freedom. The chance to build a new life without constantly looking over her shoulder. Ethan never pressured her, but she could see in his eyes that he wanted her to do it, wanted her to take that step toward permanently severing her ties to Marcus. And Katherine realized that she wanted it too, not just for herself, but for what might be possible with Ethan. Because over the past month, her feelings for him had grown into something she could no longer deny. She had fallen in love with him. It had happened gradually, in 1,000 small moments. The way he always made sure she ate first before serving himself. The careful gentleness with which he had treated her injuries. The respect he showed her opinions and thoughts. The way he looked at her sometimes, like she was something precious and rare. The sound of his laughter when she told a joke. The warmth of his presence, even when they sat in comfortable silence. This was what love was supposed to feel like. Not the possessive obsession Marcus had shown, but this quiet, steady certainty that she wanted to spend every day for the rest of her life beside this man. One evening in early April, as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Katherine finally found the courage to speak. Ethan, she said softly, I want to go see the lawyer. I want to file for divorce. Ethan turned to look at her, and the hope in his eyes made her heart ache. Are you sure? I am sure. I am tired of being afraid. I am tired of letting Marcus control my life even from a distance. I want to be free. She paused, then added quietly, and I want to see what happens next, with us. Ethan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand. It was the first time he had touched her beyond the necessary care of her injuries, and the warmth of his palm against hers sent electricity racing up her arm. I have been hoping you would say something like that, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Because, Katherine, I have to tell you, I am in love with you. I have been falling for you since the day you quoted Shakespeare at me while making biscuits, maybe even before that. And I know it is too soon. I know you need time to heal from everything you have been through, but I needed you to know. I love you. Katherine felt tears spring to her eyes, but for once they were tears of joy rather than pain. It is not too soon, she said. I love you too, Ethan. You saved my life, but more than that, you reminded me that I am worth saving. You treated me like a person, like someone who matters. You gave me back my hope. Ethan cupped her face gently in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. Can I kiss you? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Katherine breathed. Please, yes. The kiss was gentle and sweet, nothing like the brutal, demanding kisses Marcus had forced on her. Ethan kissed her like she was made of spun glass, precious and delicate. His lips were soft against hers, moving with a tenderness that made her heart feel like it might burst. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I will spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you know you are loved," he promised. "You will never have to be afraid again. You will never have to doubt your worth." "I swear it, Katherine." The trip to Medicine Bow the next week was nerve-wracking. Katherine wore one of Ethan's shirts and a pair of his trousers, her hair tucked up under a hat in an attempt at disguise. They took back trails and avoided the main roads, and Ethan kept his rifle close at hand. But they made it to town without incident and found the lawyer's office above the general store. Harrison Gates was a portly man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a kind smile. He listened carefully as Katherine told her story, occasionally asking questions, taking notes in a leather-bound book. When she was finished, he sat back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Mrs. Pierce," he said seriously, "what your husband did to you is unconscionable and, more importantly, illegal. Wyoming territory has provisions for divorce based on extreme cruelty, and your case clearly qualifies. However, I must warn you that this will not be easy. Your husband will fight it. He will likely make accusations against you, try to paint you as an unfaithful or unstable wife." "Are you prepared for that?" Katherine lifted her chin. "I am prepared to do whatever it takes to be free of him." Gates smiled approvingly. "Good. Then I will begin preparing the paperwork immediately. We will need to file in Cheyenne, as that is where the territorial courts are. I will also need witnesses who can testify to seeing evidence of your husband's violence." "Do you know anyone who might be willing to speak on your behalf?" Katherine thought hard. Most of the people she had known during her marriage had been Marcus's ranch hands or his friends. But there had been a few people in town who had shown her kindness, who had looked at her bruises with sympathy even if they had not spoken up. "There was a woman who ran the boarding house in town," Katherine said slowly. "Mrs. Sarah Thompson. She saw my bruises more than once, tried to give me salve for them. And the doctor, Dr. Whitmore. Marcus had to take me to him twice when he broke my ribs and dislocated my shoulder." "Excellent," Gates said, making notes. "I will contact both of them. With medical testimony especially, we have a very strong case. Now about your living situation. The court will want to know where you are staying and who is supporting you. They will use any hint of impropriety against you." Ethan, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "She is staying in my cabin, but I have been sleeping in the barn. There has been nothing improper between us." That was technically true, though Katherine felt her face heat slightly. They had shared one kiss, but nothing more. They had both agreed to wait until she was legally free. Gates looked between them with knowing eyes. "I am not judging, Mr. Jameson. I am simply warning you that the court might. It would be best if Mrs. Pierce had a more conventional arrangement. Do you know anyone in town who might take her in as a boarder?" "Mrs. Thompson might," Katherine said. "If she believes my story. Then that will be our first step. I will call on Mrs. Thompson myself and explain the situation. If she agrees, you will move into her boarding house until the divorce is finalized. Mr. Jameson, you can visit Katherine there, but always in public view. We cannot give Marcus Pierce any ammunition to use against us." The plan was set in motion. Gates spoke to Sarah Thompson that very afternoon, and the older woman, her eyes filling with tears when she heard the full story of Katherine's abuse, immediately agreed to take her in. She refused payment, saying it was her Christian duty to help a woman in need. Leaving Ethan's cabin felt like tearing out a piece of her heart. Over the past 2 months, it had become home in a way nowhere else ever had. But Katherine knew this was necessary. The sacrifice of a few months apart was worth the promise of a lifetime together. Ethan held her tight before she left, his face buried in her hair. "This is not goodbye," he said fiercely. "I will come to town every week to see you. And as soon as the divorce is final, I am going to marry you properly, in a church with witnesses and everything legal. You are going to be Katherine Jameson, and no one will ever be able to take you from me." "I cannot wait," Katherine whispered, clinging to him. "I love you, Ethan." "I love you too, more than words can say." The next months were the longest of Katherine's life. She settled into the boarding house, helping Mrs. Thompson with cooking and cleaning to earn her keep despite the older woman's protests. Ethan came to town every Saturday without fail, and they would sit in Mrs. Thompson's parlor and talk, always under the watchful but kind eye of their hostess. Marcus did eventually discover that Katherine was alive and in Medicine Bow. He showed up at the boarding house one day in late May, drunk and belligerent, demanding to see his wife. Mrs. Thompson met him at the door with a shotgun and told him in no uncertain terms that he was not welcome. The sheriff, who had been alerted to the situation by Gates, arrived quickly and escorted Marcus off the property with a warning that if he came back, he would be arrested. The incident only strengthened Katherine's resolve. Seeing Marcus again, seeing the rage and violence in his eyes, reminded her of exactly why she had fled into a blizzard rather than spend another day with him. The divorce proceedings began in July. Katherine traveled to Cheyenne with Gates, Ethan, and Mrs. Thompson. Dr. Whitmore sent a detailed affidavit describing the injuries he had treated Katherine for during her marriage, and Sarah Thompson testified in person about the bruises and black eyes she had witnessed. Marcus, as predicted, tried to paint Katherine as an adulteress and a liar. He claimed she was mentally unstable, that she had inflicted injuries on herself for attention. But his own reputation worked against him. Several people came forward unbidden to testify about his drinking, his violent temper, and his cruel treatment of not just Katherine but also his ranch hands and horses. The judge, a stern-faced man named Elijah Crawford, listened to 3 days of testimony before rendering his decision. He granted Katherine her divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty, and furthermore ordered Marcus to pay her a settlement of $500 in compensation for her suffering. It was an unusually generous ruling, and Katherine suspected Judge Crawford had a personal distaste for men who beat their wives. When the gavel came down, Katherine felt like she could finally breathe for the first time in years. She was free, truly, legally free. Ethan swept her into his arms right there in the courtroom, spinning her around while Mrs. Thompson laughed and wiped tears from her eyes. "You are free," Ethan said, his own eyes shining. "Katherine, you are free." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Medicine Bow. Katherine wore a simple dress of blue calico that Mrs. Thompson had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair. Ethan wore his best shirt and trousers, his hair slicked back, looking more nervous than Katherine had ever seen him. The ceremony was small, just Mrs. Thompson, Harrison Gates, Dr. Whitmore, and a few other townspeople who had supported Katherine through her ordeal. But it was perfect. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife and told Ethan he could kiss his bride, the kiss they shared was full of promise and hope and a future stretching out bright before them. They returned to Ethan's cabin, their cabin now as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Ethan carried Katherine over the threshold, making her laugh, and set her down gently in the middle of the room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Jameson," he said, pulling her close. "It feels like I have been waiting my whole life to hear those words," Katherine said, wrapping her arms around his neck. "To be your wife, not his. To have a real marriage, a real partnership." "You have me for the rest of our lives," Ethan promised. "And I plan on spending every single day making sure you know how much I love you." Their wedding night was everything Katherine had dreamed of, and nothing like the nightmare of her first marriage. Ethan was gentle and patient, always asking if she was all right, always making sure she felt safe and cherished. He kissed every scar Marcus had left on her body, as if he could erase the memories of violence with tenderness. And when they finally came together, it was with a sense of rightness that brought tears to Catherine's eyes. This was what love was supposed to be. This mutual giving and taking, this joy in bringing pleasure to each other, this sense of two souls truly becoming one. The years that followed were the happiest of Catherine's life. She and Ethan built a life together in their mountain cabin, carving out a place of peace and love in the wild Wyoming landscape. Ethan continued his trapping and hunting, and Katherine started a small vegetable garden that eventually grew into a productive plot that provided food year-round. She taught Ethan to read better than he had learned in his brief years of schooling, and he taught her to ride and shoot. They were partners in every sense of the word, each one's strengths complementing the other's weaknesses. In the spring of 1884, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mix of joy and fear. She had always wanted children, but the thought of bringing a baby into the world was terrifying after everything she had been through. What if she was not a good mother? What if her past had broken something in her that could not be fixed? Ethan held her while she cried out her fears, stroking her hair and murmuring reassurances. "You are going to be an amazing mother," he told her firmly. "You are the strongest, bravest, most loving person I know. Our child is going to be so lucky to have you." Their son was born in December of that year, a healthy baby boy with Ethan's dark hair and Katherine's blue eyes. They named him Samuel James Jameson, and the first time Katherine held him in her arms, she felt something inside her that had been broken since her marriage to Marcus finally begin to heal. This was what she had been surviving for. This moment of perfect peace and love, holding her son while her husband looked on with tears in his eyes. This was the life Marcus had tried to steal from her, and the life Ethan had given back. As Samuel grew, Katherine marveled at the father Ethan became. He was patient and playful, teaching their son to ride before he could barely walk, reading him stories every night, building him toys from scraps of wood. Watching them together, seeing the gentle way Ethan handled their child, only made Katherine love him more. 2 years after Samuel was born, their daughter arrived. They named her Emily Rose, and she had her mother's delicate features and her father's adventurous spirit. Katherine now had the family she had always dreamed of, and every day she thanked God that she had found the courage to walk into that blizzard, that Ethan had found her in the snow, that their paths had crossed at exactly the right moment. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, and she and Ethan sat on their porch watching the stars come out over the mountains, Katherine would think about how close she had come to dying in that snowstorm. How close she had come to never knowing this happiness, this peace, this overwhelming sense of being exactly where she was meant to be. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan would ask, pulling her close against his side. "Just how lucky I am," Katherine would answer. "How grateful I am that you found me." "I am the lucky one," Ethan would say, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You gave me a reason to be more than just a man surviving in the wilderness. You gave me a family, a purpose, a life worth living. I love you, Katherine, more every day." News reached them in 1888 that Marcus had died in a drunken brawl in Cheyenne. Katherine felt nothing at the news except a distant sort of relief that he could never hurt anyone else the way he had hurt her. That chapter of her life was closed, and she had no desire to revisit it even in her thoughts. As the years passed, the Jameson family grew and thrived. Samuel grew into a strong, kind-hearted boy who loved the mountains as much as his father did. Emily was bright and curious, always asking questions, always wanting to know how things worked. Katherine started teaching other children in the area during the winter months, finally fulfilling her dream of being a teacher, while Ethan expanded their land holdings and started raising horses. By 1895, 13 years after that blizzard had changed Katherine's life forever, they had built something remarkable. Their cabin had been expanded into a proper ranch house, with multiple bedrooms and a real kitchen. They had a barn full of horses, a productive garden, and a reputation as honest, hard-working people. Samuel was 17 and already taller than his father, with a gift for working with horses that made other ranchers seek him out. Emily, at 15, was helping Katherine teach the local children and talking about becoming a doctor someday. On their anniversary that year, Ethan and Katherine stood on their porch at sunset, just as they had so many times before. His arm was around her waist, and she leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. "You ever wonder what would have happened if I had not found you that day?" Ethan asked quietly. Katherine shook her head. "No, I believe we were always meant to find each other. Maybe not in that exact way, but somehow. We were meant to be together, Ethan. I truly believe that." "So do I," Ethan said, turning to face her and taking both her hands in his. "You are still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, Katherine Jameson. More beautiful now than the day I married you, if that is even possible. I love you with everything I am." "I love you too," Katherine said, her heart as full as it had been on their wedding day. "You saved my life, Ethan, in every way a person can be saved. You gave me safety, love, a family, a future. You gave me everything." "You saved me right back," Ethan said, pulling her close for a kiss that still, after all these years, made her toes curl and her heart race. "You turned a lonely cabin into a home. You made me want to be a better man. You gave me a reason to wake up every morning with joy instead of just duty." As the sun sank below the mountains, and the first stars began to appear, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The pain and terror of her first marriage seemed like something from another lifetime, something that had happened to a different person. That frightened girl stumbling through the snow had become this woman, strong, confident, deeply loved and loving in return. The scars from Marcus's abuse had faded over time, both the physical ones and the emotional ones. They had not disappeared entirely, and Katherine knew they never would. But they were no longer the defining feature of her life. Now, when she looked in the mirror, she did not see a victim. She saw a survivor. She saw a wife and mother, a teacher, a rancher. She saw a woman who had clawed her way out of darkness and built a life filled with light. Their grandchildren eventually came, Samuel's children and then Emily's, bringing new joy and laughter to the ranch. Katherine loved watching Ethan with the grandchildren, seeing him pass on his knowledge and stories to a new generation. He was in his 60s now, his hair more silver than dark, his face lined with years of sun and wind and laughter. But to Katherine, he was as handsome as he had been the day she first opened her eyes and saw him stirring broth over the fire. They grew old together on their Wyoming ranch, surrounded by family and love. They saw the territory become a state in 1890, saw the Wild West slowly become less wild, saw the modern age creeping in with railroads and telegraphs and eventually even automobiles. But some things never changed. The mountains still stood tall and proud. The snow still came every winter. And the love between Ethan and Katherine Jameson remained as strong and true as the day he had pulled her from that snowdrift and promised she would never be found. On a cold February day in 1918, exactly 36 years after the blizzard that had changed everything, Katherine and Ethan sat together on their porch wrapped in quilts, watching the snow fall. They were both in their 80s now, slowed by age but still sharp in mind and devoted to each other. Their children were grown with families of their own, their grandchildren were having children, and the legacy they had built together would continue long after they were gone. "I never get tired of the snow," Katherine said softly, watching the flakes drift down in the lamplight. "Even after all these years, it reminds me of the night you saved me." "Best night of my life," Ethan said, squeezing her hand gently. "The night I found my future." "He really never did find me," Katherine said, echoing the words Ethan had spoken to her all those years ago in his cabin. "You kept your promise. I was safe with you. I have always been safe with you." "Always," Ethan agreed. He turned to look at her, his eyes still that same warm whiskey color, still looking at her with the same love and devotion he had shown for nearly 4 decades. "Every day with you has been a gift, Katherine. Every single day." "I love you," Katherine said, the words as true and necessary as breath. "I have loved you since that first week when you made me coffee and let me talk about poetry while you just listened. I will love you for whatever time we have left, and I will love you beyond that." "And I love you," Ethan said. "My brave, beautiful Katherine. The woman who walked through a blizzard to freedom and ended up giving me everything I did not even know I needed." They sat together in comfortable silence as the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. Inside the house, they could hear their son Samuel and his family preparing dinner, their voices raised in laughter over something one of the grandchildren had done. It was the sound of life, of love, of a family bound together by more than blood, bound together by choice and commitment, and the kind of deep affection that only grows stronger with time. Katherine leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder and closed her eyes, perfectly content. She had started out as a terrified woman fleeing through the snow with nothing but the clothes on her back and the desperate hope for something better. She had found that something better in a remote cabin with a lonely cowboy who had a kind heart and gentle hands. Together, they had built a life that exceeded anything she had ever dared to dream. The blizzard that should have killed her had instead led her to exactly where she belonged. With Ethan, in these mountains, surrounded by the family they had created together. It had been a long journey from that desperate flight through the snow to this moment of perfect peace, but every step had been worth it. As the snow fell softly around them and the mountains stood eternal watch, Katherine Jameson knew with absolute certainty that she had found her happily ever after. Not the fairy tale kind, perfect and without struggle, but the real kind built on trust and respect, and a love that had weathered every storm and come out stronger on the other side. She had escaped into the drifts running from death and found life instead. She had been lost and broken, and a cowboy had found her and made her whole. He had promised she would never be found by the man who wanted to hurt her, and he had kept that promise. But more than that, he had promised with his actions every day that she would be cherished and protected and loved for as long as they both lived. It was a promise Ethan Jameson kept until his last breath, and Katherine Pierce Jameson, the woman who had survived a blizzard and built a beautiful life from the ashes of her pain, could ask for nothing more than that. Their love story began in the snow and lasted through decades of joy and sorrow, laughter and tears, the everyday moments and the extraordinary ones, proving that sometimes the darkest nights lead to the brightest dawns, and that true love, when you finally find it, is worth any journey through the cold.